The hikers weren't supposed to be this deep in the woods. It started with an innocent mistake, the kind that seemed small at first. A wrong turn, a fading trail marker, a choice between left or right, made with blind confidence. Sam, the group's unofficial navigator, had led them for hours, insisting they were still on track. The others, Jake, Melissa, and Nate, weren't so sure. The path had narrowed into something unnatural, the trees pressing closer, their twisted branches forming a ceiling that blocked out the sun. The air grew thick and stale, the forest floor damp and uneven, like no one had stepped foot here in years. And that's when they saw it. A cabin, old, abandoned, unmarked on any map. It sat alone in a clearing, hunched beneath the shadows of the pines, as if the forest itself was trying to bury it. The wood was blackened with age, the roof sagging slightly, the windows merely hollow eyes peering into the dark. Something about it felt wrong. The hikers stopped at the tree line, none of them speaking at first. The silence was heavy, stretching too long. Even the usual sounds of the woods, the chirping of birds, the rustling of unseen creatures, had vanished. "Sam," Melissa finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This wasn't on the map." "I know," he muttered, his brow furrowing. "It should be, though. A structure like this, someone would have marked it." "Maybe someone did," Nate said, shifting uneasily, "and then erased it." The sun was dipping lower, staining the sky with streaks of orange and red. They had been hiking all day, their legs aching, their canteens nearly empty. The thought of sleeping on cold, damp ground while the night crept in wasn't appealing. "We should check it out," Jake said, already stepping forward. Melissa hesitated. "I don't know." "We don't have many options," Sam pointed out. "It's shelter. It's better than freezing our asses off out here." Melissa bit her lip but nodded. They crossed the clearing, the crunch of dead leaves beneath their boots the only sound. The closer they got, the worse the AIR smelled. Damp wood, old rot, something else, something sickly sweet. The porch creaked as Jake stepped up first. He tried the door. Unlocked. The hinges groaned as it swung open, revealing a darkness that swallowed the last light of day. "Smells like something died in here," Nate muttered, pulling his shirt over his nose. Jake flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The inside was worse than they expected. Dust and decay coated everything, the walls scarred with deep scratches, the wooden floor warped with moisture. A single wooden table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs, some toppled over as if someone had left in a hurry. And then there were the journals, dozens of them, stacked haphazardly across the table. Some open, others bound shut with twine. The pages were yellowed, torn in places, covered in frantic scroll. Jake picked one up, flipping through it, his brow furrowed. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Sam leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the shaky, near illegible handwriting. "It comes at night, always closer. I hear it breathing beneath the floor. Don't look at the windows. It watches." A chill crawled up Sam's spine. "Maybe we shouldn't be here," Melissa murmured, stepping away. And that's when they heard it. A sound. Faint, distant. A slow, deliberate knock, somewhere deep within the walls. The hair on the back of Sam's neck stood on end. His fingers tightened around the journal. They weren't alone, and by morning, they would wish they had never come. Jess stood frozen, staring at the journal in her trembling hands. "Last night, I bolted the door. This morning, there were footprints in the cabin." A cold chill crawled up her spine. Something about those words felt too real. She exhaled sharply, trying to shake the creeping unease curling in her stomach. It was just a journal, old ramblings left behind by some forgotten traveler. But still, as she read the words again, she couldn't ignore the weight of them. She turned to Olivia, gripping the pages tighter. "We shouldn't be here." Olivia glanced up from where she had been sweeping dust off the wooden floor, her expression tight. "Yeah, no kidding." But it was already too late to leave. The sun was setting, bleeding red and gold through the warped glass of the cabin's single window. The forest outside stretched endlessly, the path they had taken now lost beneath the thickening shadows. They had no choice. "We stay one night," Sam said firmly, as if that would make it any less disturbing. "We rest, and at first light, we go." No one argued, but as darkness swallowed the cabin, Jess couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The first thing she noticed was the silence. The woods had been alive with sound when they arrived. Distant bird calls, the rustling of unseen animals in the brush, the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. Now, nothing. Not a single sound. No crickets, no wind, no life. Jess sat by the cold fireplace, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. Olivia was curled up next to her, Sam and Nate sitting stiffly at the table, all of them pretending not to notice the way the quiet pressed against their skin like something alive. "Maybe we should take turns keeping watch," Sam murmured. Nate forced a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Dude, it's just an old cabin. There's nothing out there." Jess wanted to believe that, but then, at midnight, the scratching began. It was soft at first, barely there. A faint, deliberate scraping against the cabin's outer wall, like nails dragging across the aged wood. Jess stiffened, her fingers digging into Olivia's sleeve. Sam shot a glance toward the door. The hell was that? Nate was already standing, grabbing the flashlight. Probably an animal. Jess knew it wasn't an animal. The scratching continued, slow, measured, deliberate. It moved, traveling along the length of the cabin, like something was circling them, like it was feeling the walls, testing them. Jess squeezed her eyes shut, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. "Don't go out there," she whispered. Nate hesitated. The scratching stopped, and then a thud, directly above them, loud, heavy. Jess sucked in a sharp breath, her entire body going rigid. Something was on the roof. The others froze. Another thud, closer this time. Slow, calculated footsteps. Whatever was up there was walking. Sam reached for his backpack, pulling out a hunting knife. It looked uselessly small. Jess could barely breathe. The footsteps stopped. Silence. The kind that listens back. Then, a low scraping sound, right above them. Something dragging its nails along the wood, moving toward the edge of the roof, toward the door, toward them. Jess wanted to scream, wanted to run, but then, the doorknob twisted. Something was trying to get in. It stayed there for hours, pacing, waiting. The heavy footsteps creaked across the roof, moving back and forth in slow, deliberate strides. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. The weight of it, too precise, too measured, made Jess feel like she was about to throw up. They had whispered among themselves, barely breathing, too afraid to speak any louder. What was it? Why hadn't it left? But no one had an answer. And then, Olivia saw it. Her breath hitched, a strangled gasp caught in her throat. Jess turned to her, eyes wide. "Olivia?" Olivia didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared. Her lips parted in a silent scream, her hands gripping the fabric of Jess's sleeve so hard her knuckles turned white. Jess followed her gaze, her stomach plummeting. The window. Something was there. Something pressed against the grimy glass. A face. It was stretched and too pale, skin like paper pulled too tight over sharp, angular bones. Hollow black pits sat where its eyes should have been, bottomless voids, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. But its mouth, God. Its mouth was wrong, a grin, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far, nearly splitting its gaunt cheeks. Its lips were thin, almost non-existent, pulled back so tightly that its gums were visible, raw, dark, wrong, and its teeth. They weren't human. They weren't even animal. Rows upon rows of jagged needle-like fangs jutted from its mouth, too many, overlapping in ways that made Jess's vision tilt with nausea. Some of them were cracked, some too long, pressing against the inside of its lips, making its whole mouth seem jagged and broken, as if it wasn't made for smiling, but it was trying to. Anyway, trying to mimic them. Jess couldn't breathe. The thing didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. Its sunken, gaping eye sockets bore into her, staring straight through the glass, through the grime, through her, as if it was looking into something deeper than just her body. It wasn't just watching. It was studying. A deep, not like a person shifting their weight, not like an animal reacting to sound. It twitched, a violent, jerking movement, like its muscles didn't quite know how to function properly. Its head tilted, first too far one way, then snapping in the opposite direction so fast that Jess swore she heard a sickening crack. The grin never faded. And then, it vanished. Jess gasped, sucking in a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her body was rigid, her hands shaking so badly that she couldn't unclench them from her lap. Olivia was still gripping her arm, her nails digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the wind moaned outside, rattling the old wooden walls of the cabin. Sam finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see that?" Jess nodded, too afraid to speak. Olivia still hadn't moved. Her wide, horrified eyes were locked on the empty window, her lips trembling. And then Nate, stupid, stubborn Nate, stood up. "I'm checking outside." Jess whipped her head toward him. "Are you insane?" He shook his head, jaw clenched, trying to steady himself. "It's probably just some sick bastard playing a prank. Someone living out here, trying to scare us." Jess's stomach turned to ice. That wasn't a person. Nate didn't answer. He just reached for the door. And outside, the forest was completely silent. Morning should have brought relief, but it didn't. The first rays of daylight barely touched the forest floor, filtering through the gnarled canopy in dull, gray slivers. The air was thick, damp, unnatural, as if the woods had been waiting, holding its breath along with them. None of them had slept. Jess sat hunched near the cold embers of the fireplace, arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the heavy silence pressing against the walls of the cabin. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Nate, usually the loudest and most stubborn among them, just stared at the door, his jaw tight. It was Olivia who finally broke the quiet. "We need to get out of here." No one argued. They gathered their things quickly, stuffing flashlights and energy bars into their packs, double-checking that their phones were charged, even though they had no signal. Sam, their navigator, unfolded the map again, tracing their planned route with trembling fingers. "We came in from the south," he muttered. "If we head that way, we should hit the main trail in less than an hour." An hour. That was all it should take. The forest felt different in the daylight, but not in a way that made Jess feel any safer. The trees were too dense, their twisted roots clawing through the soil like skeletal fingers. The deeper they went, the darker it became, despite the rising sun. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, the scent clinging to the inside of her nostrils. They walked in a straight line, following the compass, barely speaking. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Jess's legs ached, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She glanced back at Olivia, Sam, and Nate. Their faces were drawn, pale, and then the trees parted, and there it was, the cabin, exactly where they had started. "No," Sam breathed, eyes wide. "That's not... We were going in the right direction." Nate threw down his backpack in frustration. "We must have gone in circles." "We didn't," Olivia whispered. Her hands were shaking. "We didn't turn once." Jess looked at the ground, at the prints they had left behind. No trail. No evidence they had walked this way before. The dirt was smooth, untouched, as if the earth had swallowed their steps. Sam checked the compass again, his movements jerky, desperate. "We go east this time," he said. "Follow the sun." They walked again, another hour. The terrain grew harsher, the undergrowth thicker, thorned vines scratching at their ankles, pulling at their clothes like grasping hands. The light filtering through the trees dimmed, though the sun should have been rising higher. And then, the cabin, standing there, waiting. They tried again and again, northwest, cutting diagonally, marking trees, setting stones in the dirt. They tried running. They tried walking in complete silence in case the forest was listening. It didn't matter. Every time, they ended up back at the same place. By afternoon, their bodies ached, their throats raw from shouting, from arguing, from sheer mounting panic. It wasn't just that they were lost. It was that the forest didn't want them to leave. It was shifting around them, closing in. By dusk, Jess's legs barely held her up. They had no choice. They had to stay in the cabin. Again. The air inside was stale, heavy with an invisible weight pressing against them. Olivia sat against the wall, hugging herself, silent tears running down her cheeks. Sam muttered to himself, staring at the map, turning it over in his hands as if the answer would suddenly appear. Nate clenched his fists, his face dark with something between fear and fury. "We are not staying here another night." "Do you have a choice?" Jess whispered. No one answered. A low wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. The fire, weak and flickering, barely pushed back the darkness. Jess curled her fingers into the fabric of her jacket, watching the window, waiting, because she knew. Whatever was out there last night, it knew they were still here. And now it knew they couldn't leave. They needed a way out. The cabin walls felt thinner now, as if whatever was outside had been pressing against them for too long. The air inside was heavy, thick with an unseen weight that had settled deep into their bones. None of them spoke for a long time. Then Tyler turned another brittle, yellowed page of the journal, his hands trembling. The words were scrawled messily, written in frantic, jagged strokes. "It hates fire. It fears the light." Jess's breath hitched as she leaned over his shoulder, reading the words again and again, like she needed them to be real. "If we can trap it," she whispered, "we might have a chance." Tyler flipped back through the earlier pages, scanning for anything that might tell them why. Then, a passage. The writing was uneven, smeared in places, as if the writer had been shaking while writing it. "It does not belong to this world. It thrives in the shadows, in the places where the light never touches. Fire is the only thing it fears, the only thing that burns it. I tried to fight it once. It screamed when I set the lantern ablaze. It vanished before the flames could reach it, but it always comes back. It always waits. Light keeps it at bay, but only for a while." The word sent a chill down Jess's spine. Fire didn't just hurt it, It was afraid of it. That meant one thing. It wasn't invincible. It could be harmed. "We need to trap it," Sam said, his voice tense. "Lure it inside, force it into the light, and burn it." Tyler glanced at the battered old lantern near the fireplace. The glass was cracked, but the wick inside was still good. They still had fuel. "We set this on fire the second it steps inside." Nate clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the chair he was leaning against. "And if that doesn't work, then we run." No one liked that answer. No one argued with it either. They worked fast, moving through the cabin with quiet, careful steps. Sam pulled the lantern from the fireplace, refilling it with the last of their oil. Jess and Olivia gathered what little wood they had left, stacking it near the door. Nate held onto the lighter, flipping it open and closed, testing the small flickering flame that might be their only chance. Then, the waiting began. Outside, the trees swayed, but there was no wind. The silence deepened, stretching unbearably thin. Jess knew it was coming. It always came, and just as the last sliver of moonlight vanished behind the thick canopy, the scratching began, slow, deliberate. A single claw dragged down the wooden walls, circling the cabin, testing the boundaries like a predator, stalking its cornered prey, thud, on the roof. The thing moved above them, its weight shifting, making the rafters creak. A long, ragged breath exhaled from somewhere in the dark. The door rattled. Then, it creaked open. A shadow moved inside. Jess held her breath as it stepped forward, long, skeletal fingers curling around the doorframe. The air felt too thick to breathe, the space between them too small. Its eyes glowed black, hollow pits of endless hunger. Sam clenched his lighter, his hands shaking. The thing moved again. One more step. It was inside. Sam flicked the lighter. The tiny spark danced in the dark, and then he set the lantern on fire. The flames exploded to life, sending fiery orange light against the cabin walls. Shadows twisted violently, stretching long and jagged as the fire roared, devouring the last of the oil-soaked wood. And in that light, they finally saw it. The thing stood in the doorway, its gaunt skeletal frame illuminated by the fire's glow. Thin, stretched skin clung to its bones, and its limbs twitched with unnatural spasms. Its hollow black eyes locked onto them, burning with something ancient, something hateful. The firelight hurt it. For the first time, the thing wasn't moving forward. It was shrinking back, the screech of a dying thing then. It screamed. Not the sound of an animal, not the sound of a man. Something worse. Something that had never belonged to this world. The shriek ripped through the cabin, rattling the windows, shaking the wooden walls as if the entire structure would collapse under the weight of the sound. The very air seemed to warp, bending inward, suffocating. Jess clamped her hands over her ears, pain stabbing through her skull. She could feel it inside her head, writhing, pressing against the edges of her mind, trying to get in. Sam dropped to his knees, gasping. "Light it now!" Tyler didn't hesitate. He grabbed the lantern, the flames already spilling out from the shattered glass. And through it, the fire hit the thing square in the chest. It shrieked louder, higher, raw with agony. The flames crawled up its skin, sticking like molten tar, sinking into the grooves of its unnatural form. The creature twisted and convulsed, its elongated limbs snapping at impossible angles. Smoke poured from its flesh, filling the cabin with a thick, acrid stench, like rotting meat burned down to the bone. And still, it didn't die. It thrashed, slamming against the walls, knocking over the old furniture, sending sparks flying. Then, with one last ear-splitting screech, it bolted, tearing through the door and into the woods, the fire still devouring its body. They stood there, panting, shaking, half collapsed on the wooden floor. The fire had spread to the walls. Thick smoke curled toward the ceiling, creeping through the cracks of the old wooden beams. The heat was rising, the orange glow spilling out into the trees, casting eerie, flickering shadows through the forest. "We have to go," Olivia gasped, coughing through the smoke. Jess stumbled forward, grabbing Tyler's arm, forcing him to move. And then, the woods shifted. Where there had been endless trees, an endless loop trapping them in the nightmare. Now the path was clear. Jess blinked, breath hitching in disbelief. Through the thinning smoke, she could see it. The trail they had lost, stretching back toward safety, toward home. "The fire," Sam whispered. "It let us go." The forest had been holding them. But now, the thing that had controlled it was dying. They didn't question it. They ran, not stopping, not looking back, not caring what was left behind. The fire burned bright behind them, devouring the cabin, turning the creature's lair into nothing more than ash and ruin. And when the sun finally rose, they were out. The woods were just woods again, and the thing that had haunted them was gone. Or at least, they hoped it was. By the time they reached the ranger station, the sun was high in the sky, casting golden rays over the treetops. It should have felt warm, comforting, but the chill in their bones didn't fade. They stumbled into the small wooden outpost, exhausted, their clothes torn, filthy, reeking of smoke and sweat. Sam's hands were still shaking. Olivia's face was pale, streaked with dried tears. They were alive, but the nightmare still clung to them. The two rangers on duty, Burke and Holloway, exchanged a glance as the group collapsed into the chairs. Burke, the older of the two, scratched his stubbled jaw and poured them cups of water. "You kids look like hell." "We almost died out there," Jess whispered, staring at the floor. There was something in the woods. Burke and Holloway didn't laugh. They didn't tell them it was just exhaustion or paranoia. They just listened. Tyler tried to explain it. The cabin, the footprints, the thing in the window, the way the woods had trapped them, twisting and shifting, keeping them lost. Sam leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "We burned it. We set it on fire, and the path opened. It let us go." Burke exhaled heavily. He walked over to a metal filing cabinet in the corner, his boots scuffing against the wooden floor. He flipped through a thick, leather-bound book, its yellowed pages worn with time. Then, he turned it around and slid it across the desk. "You were lucky," he said. His voice was low, grave. Sam frowned. "What do you mean?" Burke tapped his finger on the open page. There, names, dozens of them, dates, hundreds of them. Some names had red lines drawn through them. Some had nothing at all. Holloway folded his arms. "For the last 100 years, people have gone missing in that stretch of woods." "Hundreds," Burke muttered, rubbing his temple. "Hikers, hunters, families, no bodies, no trails, just gone." Jess swallowed hard. "But we made it out." Her voice was barely a whisper. Burke nodded slowly. "Yeah, and you're the first ones who have." Silence filled the room. The weight of the Rangers' words settled over them like a shroud. For years, the forest had taken people. It had lured them in, trapped them, consumed them. But not this time. Something had changed. The fire, the thing inside the woods. It had been weakened, wounded. But was it gone? Burke studied them carefully, his weathered face unreadable. Then he shut the book. "If I were you," he said, his voice low and serious, "I'd never go back." Sam's hands clenched into fists. "We won't!" They left the station without looking back. without seeing Burke and Holloway exchange one last look, without hearing Holloway whisper under his breath, "Not yet." Thank you so much for listening to this story. Click the bell icon so you never miss any new content. Stay tuned for more creepy stories coming soon. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the dark, subscribe for more. Because the best horror isn't what you hear, it's what follows when the story is over.